Have a timeout. Decide not to use it. Curry, way downtown. Bang! Bang! Oh, what a shot! Artest looking, gets it to Bryant. Bryant Tillman has to put it up for the buzzer. He banks it!
What is up, everybody? Welcome to a special edition of Scotty Talks NBA. Of course, we're not here on my regularly scheduled day. We are here on a Friday, but I've become so excited with how the Sixers are playing recently that I really wanted to do something spontaneous, and I had a very special guest become available today. So, welcome Sean Barnard to the show here. If you guys don't already know, anybody that's following me, listening to my show on DSM Media here, make sure you're following Sean at Sean_Barnard1. Covers the Sixers across the board, writes for Philadelphia Sports Network. You can find them at Philadelphia SN on Twitter. Also host of the Pick Swap podcast. You can find them on Twitter as well at Pick Swap Pod. Sean, welcome to the show, my man. I'm happy to get you on here and break down some Sixers talk.
Yeah, I appreciate you for having me. The vibes are back in Philadelphia. Sixers are off to a hot start, so things are going good.
Yeah, so they're going good, and we'll get into all of it. Obviously, we'll touch on the 5-game win streak, how they've been playing without some of their stars, Tobias, Ben. And then we'll also talk a little bit about Joel, who, isn't necessarily playing at that MVP level, but is still giving us enough to kind of ride behind him. But yeah, thanks for coming on the show. I'm glad to have you. Everybody that's watching, make sure if you're not already, oh wow, Apple Watch going on. Make sure if you're not already, follow DSM Media on Twitter at DSM_media. You'll find a link tree in our bio there, and it'll connect you to all the social media platforms. And then, of course, make sure you're subscribed on YouTube to DSM Media. Just look it up, subscribe. We got you covered across all those different sports palettes. But Sean, let's get right into it, man. I don't want to hold you up too much today. I know you got some stuff to do. First things first, I just want to know just some general takeaways from what you've seen throughout the 5-game win streak stretch, starting with that Detroit Pistons win at home all the way through this Detroit Pistons road win now. Just initial takeaways from that stand.
So I guess the first thing and my biggest takeaway so far this year is this team's fun. This team competes. It's that even with like all the lingering distraction and there's been so much Ben Simmons off-court chatter, the guys that have shown up and been in building are taking care of business, have not lost focus, and it's cool to see what they're putting on the floor. I love the way that they're just competing on both ends of the floor. The defense has been better than I think people have expected going into the year. I love the switching. I love the switchability. And, like, it seems like a shout-out to Daryl Morey for getting a lot of kind of chip-on-the-shoulder guys, I guess I would say, with this team. And from Georges Niang to Seth Curry to we know Embiid's been built like that to the entire roster kind of has that sort of competitive edge and, like, that dog mentality, which is cool to see. And I'm very impressed with that early on. There's obviously a whole lot of seasons still to play, but the early takeaways, I think, are pretty much almost entirely positive.
Yeah, it has to be positive. Even in a sense of, with everything going on with Ben Simmons, you're starting to see these guys kind of step into roles. Tobias has been out, even Danny Green out recently. Guys are getting to step into even more roles. They're starting to figure out, even other parts of this team that we didn't think we'd have to figure out just yet. And I think you're starting to get guys with more confidence. So that's kind of what I want to ask you from that point. Any surprises so far? Have you been surprised by anybody's performance? Maybe it's been a bad performance. Maybe it's been, like the Georges Niangs of the world that have kind of blown our minds. Any thoughts there?
Yeah, I guess Georges Niang will be my biggest surprise so far. When we think about Niang, like prior to this year, he's been a guy who's been a niche fit in his role. And he was very just shoot threes, play his role, especially with the Jazz. And he's 28 years old. He's never played more than 16 minutes per game in his career. And you see he got an opportunity to really do his thing this year. And he's proving that he is a hooper. And you think back to when he was back in Iowa State, He was the man there, and he could do a little bit of it all. Put the ball on the floor, attack the basket, shoot the mid-range, shoot the three, and then to be kind of pigeoned into such like a clear-cut role for his entire time in the NBA. It's cool to him to take all the training wheels off and just play again. And he's proved that he's good enough that he can do it. He's been a huge addition to this team, and the second unit has been so much better with him on it. The gravity that he has as a shooter and the rate he shoots the ball. Going into last night's games, he was 19th in the league in three-point attempts per 36 minutes. So just the way he's seeking out his shot, that's something that like just makes an impact for spreading the floor. And like there's just so much more to his game than I expected. And also I'd like to just say Seth Curry continues to impress me. And not that I want to say I'm surprised because that's all we've seen since he's been here, but I can't believe it's taken this long for him to fully find a right role in the league. And when we think about what this guy does and an all-time great statistically shooter, just every shot he throws up, it feels like it's going to go in. And he's seeking out his shot way more. He's looking for it more. You saw him big shot to close out the Bulls game, a difficult shot too with Caruso all over him. The confidence that he has, it's showing out on the team, and I'm loving everything I see. And he's proving that he's good enough to be like a legitimate perimeter counterpart to Joel Embiid.
And it's so funny that you bring up Seth and George Niang in the same, breath, because that's been my thing, so far this season is watching how confidently they shoot. They're not afraid to shoot with somebody in their face. And you see that with Niang, and I'm wondering if it just kind of stems, and you see that confidence from a guy who did come from a clear-cut role on a contending team in Utah, played very smart basketball, highly IQ driven, knows their spots on defense, right? He fit into that team so perfectly. But what team wouldn't he fit into? You know what I mean? When you're so confident in that skill set, which obviously he is a shooter, like he is confident in that. So you bring that confidence to the Sixers, then you start seeing guys like Matisse who he's not thinking about shooting anymore. He's just shooting. And you're just wondering if some of that is rubbing off there. Just the confidence that you're seeing throughout the roster there. The thing about Niang, you mentioned his time in Iowa State, and that's where I remember him mostly from. He was a superstar in college. It obviously flattened out, in the NBA. That's where you start to see athleticism accounted for a lot more. But what I want to ask you about Niang is, do you think that it's sustainable? And even Seth Curry, you can throw him into this conversation where right now, yes, Niang's going to get a ton of minutes with Tobias not there just because, Tobias plays that forward role. But is Niang earning those extra minutes now to where he's going to get those even when Tobias is back? Like, do you think this is sustainable efficiency-wise and as far as volume?
I mean, to an extent, I do. I don't think necessarily what we're seeing right now, just obviously with the guys that are out, like his minutes will absolutely be cut into when Tobias is back and Danny Green is back. But just like when we think about Mike Scott and what he was to this team, is he was almost a zero by the end of his career team. And outside of the 27 game stretch when we first traded for him, he was pretty much unplayable as on a contending team. So I think Niang is at least playable for a winning franchise and for like a guy that can come in and provide valuable minutes. There's still like defensively, he is slow footed. He's got a little, and playoff wise, that does concern me that he will be the guy that will be targeted by the other team on defense for sure. So, but that being said, like he still competes out there. He still brings enough that it's not like a zero. And with like the block by Embiid to end that Bulls game was a clear example. Like Niang got beat on that play, and Embiid to take off pretty much from the 3-point line and recover. Like as long as Embiid's the counterpart behind him, I'm not that worried about it because I've said this from the beginning that as long as Embiid's the anchor, the Sixers will still be a solid defensive team this year, and that's shown so far. So at Curry, the numbers will once again go down to some extent. He's shooting 53.1% from three right now, which is absurd. He was up in the 60s and 70s for the first couple games. Like those are crazy numbers, but like that's not that much of an outlier when we look at his career path. And he's been a consistent top of the NBA shooter his entire career here. And the thing that to me is just the biggest takeaway for Seth is last year I kind of thought he is an all-time great shooter percentage because he's so smart in where he takes it that he doesn't take contested shots. He doesn't force it. This year we're seeing him search out for his own shot and find areas where he can get it up more. And the numbers are still staying that high, which to me speaks volumes. So I do think they're both sustainable to an extent. I think the numbers will come down a little bit. Yeah,
and I tend to agree with you there. I do just wonder, with Niang kind of proven what he's capable of. Because you mentioned it, he is kind of slow on his feet. He's not the best defender. He at least tries, and he tries, to the full extent. But sometimes that isn't good enough. But he has shown that he can put the ball on the floor, make passes, on off the dribble. And he's even showed like the floater at times. It's a very awkward floater.
Yeah.
I just wonder if he can kind of creep into that closing lineup from game to game. Obviously it's situational, but I've seen games, where Danny Green hasn't looked the best and they put him out there at the end of games. He's, for that Brooklyn game specifically where he airballs like 3 games. His legs obviously weren't under him because he didn't play most of the game due to foul trouble. Situations like that. Yeah. Is Niang compatible with playing beside Tobias Harris? That's my thing. I don't know if how that looks just yet. But one other player I wanted to ask you about before we move on to Embiid is Andre Drummond. How impressed have you been with Andre Drummond? What are some positives, some negatives you've seen from him?
Yeah, I mean, so far so good with him. A lot of it is to me like it is the Dwight Howard role, and it's just cut out so much of the nonsense. Is that we're not getting the obnoxious offensive fouls, we're not getting the technicals, and he's just flat out better. There's more to his offensive play specifically and on both ends than Howard had at his stage of his career. And there's still, to me, like I want to box Drummond in a little and do a little less at times. Is my thing. It hasn't been too bad so far this year, and it's cool. The game he started, I was impressed with the way he just dominated the boards of that game, and he's a physically demanding force. There's not a lot of guys that can match up with just the size and the physicality that this guy brings, and it seems like he's been all fine around the team in the locker room, which is one of the other concerns going in. So I'm very happy with what he's brought so far. And it is cool that instant impact, just the bruising kind of the thunder with him and Embiid, which I like having that element.
Yeah, it's interesting because, I don't want to say that, it's kind of how I felt last year, as far as having like a big body like Dwight Howard, a physical specimen come in after Embiid. And you kind of get no breaks. But this one is Andre Drummond is on a different level than that. Yeah. He, like you mentioned, not as many detractors as far as dumb fouls, technical fouls, referee problems. But then also, I guess with Drummond, you just want him to hone it in a little bit with like the playmaking, the crazy passes like that. But he gives you a lot less mistakes, a lot less detractors. And he is just a bigger guy in general. He kind of operates in the same area, similar areas as Joel Embiid. Obviously not a jump shooter, but it is kind of crazy having that guy to go to off the bench there. As far as Joel Embiid, we mentioned him already here. He has I hate to say he's struggling, averaging 20 and 9. He's shooting one of his lowest percentages in his career. He had mentioned that, part of it, he didn't want to, make an excuse of the new basketballs they're using. He's not the only superstar that has mentioned the new basketball that they're using in the NBA. Mm-hmm. How much do you think this early on struggle pertains to, missing Ben Simmons, having to pick up a workload in the defensive end more, the hampering knee injury that he suffered, towards the beginning of the season, and, the difference in the basketball being used that he mentioned? How much of all of this, what are you seeing from Joel Embiid as far as what he's been struggling with so far?
Yeah, I think it's a lot of everything combined. The knee is my biggest concern for sure. And just I haven't felt great about the way you can constantly see him grabbing at it. And it feels like there's like once or twice a game where there's a hold your breath moment. We saw last night where there was the double team where he kind of tried to go through and went knee to knee and fell. And it's just kind of like every time he hits the floor, there's a little bit of a,
it's almost like he holds his breath as well. You know what I mean? It's like he looks over at his knees like, whoa, it just got hit awkwardly. How does it feel? And I definitely feel you on that.
Yeah, it definitely feels that way, which, in the long term, I'm not concerned. I still think this guy we know how phenomenal he can be when he flips the switch, and he will get there. Yeah. The shot selection hasn't been great so far this year. There's been a lot of settling for the mid-range and the fadeaway mid and that kind of thing. But if that's him saving his body, and if that's when we get closer to playoffs, that's when he's ready to bang on the post and attack hard, that's perfectly fine with me. And part of this is tactically, obviously, without Ben Simmons. There's been so much more of an emphasis on his passing and him finding teammates. And I like the buying into the Embiid and 4 shooters. And I also think there's a chip in the shoulder area of Embiid who just wants to prove that he can pass. And when we think about like the MVP race last year, how everyone talked about Jokic's passing, and I'm not saying Embiid is doing this as a statement to prove he can, but I think there is a part of him that's like, I can do that. I can do what he does if I'm in that kind of system. So I think that part is feeding into it. He's for sure seeking out. He's been a great teammate this year. I mean, defensively, he's been great. He's making the right reads. His turnovers are down, assists are up. So there's still a lot of positives, even though the numbers aren't awesome. The 41.2% on his field goal percentage needs to get higher. That's by far the worst in his career. And I mean, down the stretch, I think he'll be fine. There's certainly things you can nitpick, but he's still Joel Embiid, and he's still leading this team to a 7-2 start.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's, that's the big point here, is that they are still 7-2. They have beat some quality teams so far as well, while also being in games with, teams like the Brooklyn Nets, where they probably should have won that game. They should be 8-1. Just before we, kind of move to the next step, with Embiid, what would you do in this situation? Do you kind of just wait for Tobias to get back, maybe give him a little bit of rest time with the knee? How do you play this knee situation out? And I know you're not a doctor, but at the end of the day, what would you do as far as that knee uncomfortableness? Is that just something he's going to have to deal with? Or do you think it's, I don't know, based on reports, if that's something that if he takes a little bit of time off, it could get back to 100%?
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like it's, for the most part, it's pain management with him and what he's just able to put up with, willing to put up with. And he's fighting through it right now. Like, you can tell a lot of him playing this many minutes, and he's only missed one game so far. Like, it's him trying to put this team on his shoulders, prove the leadership, which is all admirable. I don't care about him playing these regular season games. Like, the whole priority should be him being prepared for playoffs. What I wanted to happen and my idea for the Sixers was that the Sixers start a 6-game away trip on November 13th, where they head out to the West Coast. I would have loved to give him those 6 games off, bring Ben Simmons back, let him play those 6. Yeah. He can be the 1A of the offense, and that's his audition for 6 West Coast teams. So
I love that idea.
But it doesn't sound like Simmons is really willing to do that. I think that would have been a great chance for Embiid to fully let his body heal, because I think in general this is going to be something he deals with for his whole career. But I think just any sort of stretch where he can rest can make it better. But I think for now he's just going to soldier through. Yeah,
and it kind of puts him in a tough spot, when Tobias gets the COVID issue, which, prayers to Tobias. I know that he's dealing with the COVID, which, you just hope that he's able to get over that, and we'll go to the next step from there. You just want to get through that whole process itself. But, as far as Embiid and so what I wanted to get to next is the team without Tobias, without Danny Green. What does this mean as a whole for them, for these role players like Matisse, Niang, even Maxey, Milton, Korkmaz? They're getting these extra minutes, even in crunch time in these games, which, Tyrese Maxey played 45 minutes last night. I didn't even notice it, but you did notice it because he was on the floor a lot. But I didn't mind it. It's what I've always expected from our superstars. I know Embiid can't go that many minutes, but guys like Ben, Tobias, throughout these crunch time games where we need you in the game against guys like KDs of the world, I do want these guys to be able to play minutes like that, just like a normal superstar would. What does this time, this building, these growing moments for these role players where they get these increased minutes, what does this do for the team going forward once they do get Tobias back? You get Embiid fully healthy. You get something in return for Ben Simmons. What does this do for them going forward?
Yeah, it's never a bad thing for these guys to get more developmental minutes, and everybody's being asked to be more than I guess will be the case when things are finally cut down.
Right.
Like, Maxey is a second-year guard who is fully running the offense, being the prime point guard on a contending team. Seth Curry has never had the ball in his hands as much as he has had this year. Georges Niang, once again, has never been a true, legitimate rotational piece, more of a fit-in kind of player, and he's being asked to almost run the second unit. All these guys, Furkan stepping up into a legitimate backup point guard role, which is something I never thought I would see.
Right.
And look at that. So all these guys are being asked to do more, especially this year. And, I mean, to prepare them early in the season, and hopefully we have a rotation in the way we want it, and we have the full roster in the way we want it when we come down to playoffs, this can't be a bad thing. And it's way better to be over-prepared than under-prepared, and all these guys seem good to go. So I've been excited that everybody's kind of jumping at the opportunity, and it's kind of rare to have that type of opportunity in the NBA. So good for all these guys, and in the long run, I think it is a good thing.
Yeah, and even against these, I guess you can call them bottom feeder teams like the Detroit Pistons, you see guys like Paul Reed get, a lot of minutes last night, which is, I just think that's great.
Yeah.
You get these guys in these games like Matisse where there's no pressure if you take that 3-point shot. We're not going to kill you for that against the Detroit Pistons. And then once you start making them, you get the confidence against the better teams.
Mm-hmm.
But overall, I think it's just been a great experience for this team. You mentioned Maxey, who I'm sure Maxey's like one of my favorite players on the squad right now.
Yeah.
I have superior confidence in that kid. And Korkmaz, who you mentioned, he's shown a level of confidence. He started it with the hype video in the offseason, and it is like translated. I know he didn't play last night. He was on the injury report. He was out with an injury, but his confidence, it's not just the shooting. It's finishing in the lane, making the right play off the dribble, which it's been nice to see him in that backup point guard role. Don't know how sustainable that is. I'm not willing to go into the playoffs with that, but, it's nice to see that version of him. The last thing I wanted to get to, obviously the elephant that's been in the room since June, it feels like, since halfway through last season, you could even say at this point, but Ben Simmons. Just an update on Ben Simmons. What's your understanding? Obviously, the Sixers went ahead. They put, $360,000 of his, what he's owed in an escrow account. What's your understanding of that whole situation, them fining him, and just how that – I don't know if you have background with, the Players Association as far as how the Sixers are allowed to do that.
Yeah, so in the collective bargaining agreement, if a player is going through a mental health issue, which Simmons has – said that he is to the team, that is still paid for in his contract. And his issue with he didn't make any money before reporting to camp or the days that he got kicked out with that. So he begun to get paychecks again when he started to go through these steps to heal his mental process and rejoin the team. The Sixers are upset with the lack of communication from Simmons' camp with just reporting. And on this would be the same process if this was any physical injury, the same thing of just getting updates and just knowing what you're working with. And now Simmons is working through the Players Association to get help with that. So he's not doing nothing, but the Sixers are just frustrated with the lack of communication. And just my frustrations with this whole thing is I feel like it's become such a mess when it just doesn't need to be. And I obviously understand he wants to be traded, but this is another one of those just if you just send over a quick text about what happened. You're still getting paid right now. There's none of these issues. And I guess making it harder than what it is my frustration. And even though Simmons camp is made some strides to, I guess, make things more civil, there's still a clear trying to burn bridges everywhere they can is what it looks like to me.
Yeah. And, just to start with what you started with there, I'm glad you clarified that. Regardless if it's a mental challenge or a physical challenge that he was facing in order to get back to playing basketball, it's going to be handled the same way with the lack of communication, the lack of correspondence with the, working with Sixers doctors that they, give to him, whatever the case may be. But it's not even just not working with the Sixers doctors. It's not communicating about not working with the Sixers, just not showing up to those meetings. So it's good that you clarify there. But yeah, it's the same thing we've, been beating a dead horse with this entire process with Ben Simmons. And it's the accountability thing, not wanting to show up. If you want out of Philadelphia so bad, you mentioned it. Why not get yourself prepared to come back for that 6-game road trip in the West? Mm-hmm. Get yourself prepared to play in that road trip. You don't have to see the Philadelphia fans at all. You can get showcased. We could even, I'm sure there's some way in there, if they came to that conclusion where, hey, go out here, showcase, we want you to be the number one for this time period so we can get you out of here. Mm-hmm. I'm sure something like that can be worked out to get Embiid a break, something like that. You know what I mean? If that's what's best for the team, why not set yourself up for that to get out of here? If you want to play basketball, if you want to play somewhere else so bad, it just does not make sense to me, Sean.
Yeah, I don't get it either. To me, that's such a great opportunity for this. And like you said, it wouldn't be in front of the Philly fans. It's for the teams that you really want to get yourself to at the end of this. So this is go out and prove yourself. This is your audition. Make it what you want. And giving Embiid this time off would be so beneficial. But it definitely sounds like he has no interest in ever putting on a Sixers uniform again or stepping on the floor. And he seems pretty dead set in that. So as much as I think this is a great idea and a great opportunity, unfortunately, I think it's going to be missed from the stubbornness and the lack of just willing to do that. And again, it's so frustrated with all the Ben Simmons willing to do whatever it takes to get out of Philly. It's like whatever it takes except just stepping on the floor for a little and playing basketball. So it's been so much of a mess from the beginning and continues to get worse, unfortunately.
And the kicker, the conundrum of it all is the Sixers are still winning. They're still a good team. Yeah. And he just doesn't want to be part of a good team. It makes it even weirder. Thanks for checking in, Chili. I appreciate you. Sean, I don't know you, but what's up? Hey, if you don't already follow Sean, make sure you're following Sean at Sean_Barnard1. He is the host of the Pick Swap podcast where he covers the Sixers. You can find Pick Swap Pod on Twitter at Pick Swap Pod. And he also writes about the Sixers for Philadelphia Sports Network. Find them at Philadelphia SN. Make sure you're checking out all of Sean's work. He's a very quality guest I got here. Last thing I wanted to ask you, same thing, Ben Simmons, but more around the team and what you're willing to deal with here. Has the way the team, how they've performed, guys like Seth Curry, does it change kind of what you want in return for Ben Simmons? So, like, before, I was more inclined to accepting a trade for like a CJ McCollum who gives you that awesome scoring threat from the guard position. Are you, I don't know if you were in on CJ McCollum in the first place or a deal surrounding him. Are you less inclined for a guard like that and more inclined for a guard that's going to run the team now? Has anything changed about what you're looking for in return for Ben Simmons based on the way the team has performed?
So Daryl Morey has been firm about it being a difference maker is the word he always used for a return for Ben Simmons.
Right.
I guess my biggest takeaway is I have no interest in like a littering of role players or complementary pieces because you look at this roster and these are guys that can do that. We have plenty of role players. We have plenty of guys that can do this kind of role. So I'm okay with continuing to hold out a little. And if we can get kind of a versatile, like a guy that can just score. And I mean, it's again, nothing's really changed with who we're looking for. I would love a wing player. Jaylen Brown would be awesome. I would be all about a Jaylen Brown spot. So any kind of like, we still need a legitimate like A tier kind of player in this. And unfortunately, I don't think it works to Simmons' benefit that the Sixers is doing well. I think that just inclines them to be willing to hold on. And Morey's not a guy that seems willing to lose this battle, and he can't make the sake of the ceiling of this team. So I think we're still in it for the long haul.
Yeah, and I think you may be right, whether the long haul is the trade deadline or if it's the end of this, the off season, if it's 4 years, whatever the case may be. I do agree with you because as the Sixers win, you see they don't necessarily need a return for Ben as of right now when they're leading the entire Eastern Conference at 7-2. So it makes a ton of sense. I guess, what I'm hoping is, guys like Lillard, who has kind of been he hasn't sucked at the beginning of the season. He's definitely out of character as far as what we're used to from Damian Lillard. He's obviously still, he's all bought in on Portland. I'm hoping that will maybe sometime over the season instantly change. Guys like De'Aaron Fox, I mentioned to you before the show, like the Sacramento Kings, De'Aaron Fox hasn't, he's got off to a slow start. They have a plethora of guards over there. Are they going to be more willing to maybe part ways from De'Aaron Fox, who's a guy I would be interested in? I think he would be a difference maker at the point guard. And you talk about if you could keep him and keep Tyrese Maxey, then you pair those two Kentucky point guards together. I think that would be awesome as a starting, six-man role for Maxey at that point. How would you feel about a deal surrounding, maybe with like Sacramento around a guy like Fox and maybe throw Bagley in there, or maybe it's a guy like Halliburton, throw Bagley in there? Would you be open to anything like that? Or are you strictly going for superstar level caliber?
Yeah, I like De'Aaron Fox a whole lot, and he's right at the bottom of that tier that I would consider for sure. Yeah. And I think him and Maxey, I think even on the court together would be electric with just the pace they would bring and a increased look at a team. Fox, a slow start to the season on his end. He hasn't been great so far. So I think I think it would have to be a Fox. And like you said, Bagley's probably in there for a couple picks. I'm not a huge Marvin Bagley guy. But I do think Fox is good enough to be like a legitimate starting point guard on a good team. And I've been a fan of his since his Kentucky days, since we took Markelle Fultz in that draft. And he was my guy when we were sitting at 3 for who I wanted before we made the trade up. So I would love to reunite him in Philly and make things right. And I do think he has that kind of that upper echelon ceiling that we're hoping for.
And interesting question from one of our viewers here. So just last thing before I let you go, we're right at that 30-minute mark. Do you think Tyrese is off the table with how he's been playing lately?
Not unless I think yes, unless it's for the Dame Lillard tier, probably the Dame Lillard, Bradley Beal, and that kind of. Morey is going to do everything possible to keep Maxey in Philly, and I mean, I love this kid. I think everyone in Philadelphia absolutely loves him.
Yeah.
His personality, his work ethic, just the way he plays the game, everything about him just fits and is awesome. And we're definitely in no rush to give him up. But there is when we look at assets, like he's right at the top of the list for things that other teams are attracted to.
Yes.
So if there is like a Lillard or a huge blockbuster deal, I think teams will certainly be asking about him.
Maxey.
Yeah. I think it's unlikely that he's traded, but not impossible.
It'd be interesting if he plays himself into becoming more valuable than Ben Simmons. Ben Simmons is the add-on to Maxey at one point throughout the season. I will not be surprised by anything. I promise you that.
Yeah.
But Sean, this is all I had for you today, man. I definitely appreciate you coming on, especially on a Friday. I know Fridays are busy, but definitely going to get you on soon. I would love to keep having you as a recurring guest here, just to keep updating, keep, breaking the silence on the Sixers, and really diving into them. But man, thank you once again. If you got anything other than what I've already mentioned going on, if you just want to plug yourself one more time so my listeners can find you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me. And I'd love to come on whenever. Check out my written work at Philly Sports Network, all the Sixers coverage for there. And then Pick Swap Podcast is me and my co-host James podcast. So give us a subscribe on YouTube. Check us out too. And I'll definitely be back on here.
Awesome, Sean. And yes, shout out to James. I'm going to get James on soon too. I have also hit him up, but I love you guys over at the Pick Swap Pod. You guys bring some great Sixers content as well as Philadelphia Sports Network. So keep doing your thing. That is going to be all I have for you today, Sixers fans, NBA fans. Have a great Friday. Have a great weekend, guys. That's going to be it for this episode. Peace.